Problem number 5. A large lecture has 1,000 students. On a midterm exam, the class average was 70 with a SD or standard deviation of 12. It is suggested that the early morning section has more serious students and would therefore have higher scores. This section has 36 students and their average was 75. The question is whether this 5-point difference is real or whether it may simply be due to chance variation. First step is to identify the null and alternative hypotheses. So in the first sentence, we have a large lecture has 1,000 students, then followed by on a midterm exam, the class average was 70 with a standard deviation of 12. So in this given problem, we're talking about the class average and a large lecture has 1,000 students na sentence has nothing to do with the problem. So meaning to say, we ignore the first sentence although it has a numerical value since parang it's just an added information and that information does not contribute to parang anything na may kinalaman dito sa word problem. So, let's look for the factual statement as well as the parang researcher's claim so that we can have a basis in constructing the null and alternative hypotheses. On the second sentence, we have on a midterm exam, the class average was 70 with an SD of 12. So, for this one, parang, di ba, obviously, ito ay factual statement na they're referring to class average of parang siguro of any section. Basta the class average on a certain midterm exam is 70. So meaning to say, this can be our basis in constructing the null hypothesis, and our null hypothesis will be the population mean is equal to 70. We proceed with the next sentence. It is suggested that the early morning section has more serious students and would therefore have higher scores. So, for this one naman, this will be our basis for the alternative hypothesis since this is parang somehow a researcher's claim because of the phrase, it is suggested that. Okay po. So, the null hypothesis will be the population mean is greater than 70 since in the statement we have the phrase have higher scores. So, yung higher scores, ang inequality symbol for that is greater than. Second step, we identify the alpha level and the tail test. In this given problem, there's no parang term na alpha level or significance level or any symbol for level of significance. So if this is the case, automatically our level of significance is equal to 0.05. Again, if it is not stated in the problem, it's okay. All you have to do is just automatically assign a level of significance as 0.05. Next, we have to identify if this is one or two-tailed. You go back to the alternative hypothesis and the mathematical symbol for the alternative hypothesis is greater than. So meaning to say the number of tailed tests is 1. Step 3, identify the statistical test that you're going to use for this given word problem. And since the number of sample in this given problem is 36 kasi diba in the third sentence, it stated that this section has 36 students. So meaning to say we have 36 samples. So since this is greater than or equal to 30, then meaning to say we have to use a statistical test 1 sample Z test. Step 4 is the computation. Let us now identify the numerical values for this given problem. Again po, the first sentence should be ignored since yung 1,000 students is just parang an additional information in this problem. So you just have to disregard it. We will now proceed with the second sentence. On a midterm exam, the class average was 70 with a standard deviation of 12. So, since we don't have any synonymous terms na for sample or the term sample itself in this given sentence. So meaning to say they are referring to the population. So the average, that is 70, is the population mean, and the SD of 12 is the population standard deviation. We skip the next sentence since it doesn't contain any numerical values. We proceed with this section has 36 students. So, yung section is parang they're referring to the sample of students they are referring to. So, meaning to say, ito ay lahat ng numerical values that will be in this sentence will be intended for the sample. Continuing, has 36 students. So, meaning to say, yung 36 natin is the number of sample. And their average was 75. So, 75 daw is the average, and this 75 is in the sentence for the sample. So, meaning to say po, 75 is the sample mean. Now that the values are complete, all we have to do is choose the formula for one sample z-test. Is it the formula wherein they use the population standard deviation, or the one that uses the sample standard deviation? So you just go back to the given values and check what is the given standard deviation. So for this one, it's the population standard deviation. So we have to use the formula under one sample z-test that uses population standard deviation. Substituting the values, we will have 75 minus 70 all over 12 over the square root of 36. We now proceed with the calculation using your calculator. The calculator on the left side shows you how are you going to input the values if your calculator is a 4-liner calculator. And the calculator on the right side shows you how are you going to input the values if your calculator is a 2-liner calculator. Value for the C computed in this given problem is 2.5. Step 5 is the decision rule. Again, the decision rule for all the problems under one sample series will be reject null hypothesis if the absolute value of Z computed is greater than the absolute value of Z tabular. So, since we already computed for the Z computed, we now have to identify the Z tabular for this given problem. For us to identify the Z-tabular for this given problem, you have to go back to step 2 and recall the alpha level as well as the tail test. Identifying the Z-tabular for this given problem, we have to draw an imaginary vertical line passing through 0.05 since that is the level of significance for this problem. And draw also an imaginary horizontal line passing through one tailed test since that is the tail test in this given problem. Then getting the intersection of the two lines, then that will be the Z-tabular. We already have the value for the C computed as well as the C tabular. So all we have to do is substitute the given value. So we will have 2.5 is greater than 1.645. Step 6, identify if we have to reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. To verify, we have to go back to step 5 and check if the given inequality is true or false. So going back, we have 2.5 is greater than 1.645 and that is true. So meaning to say, we reject the null hypothesis since the given inequality is true. Next step and last step for this given problem is the conclusion. Since in step 6, we said that we reject the null hypothesis, the conclusion will be the early morning section has more serious students and would therefore have higher scores.